The Final Destination series is one of my all-time favorites in the horror genre. This distinctly new millennia franchise has been causing anxiety around household objects for decades now, and I want to analyze what makes a good one and find out what are the best and worst by way of subjective math. So allow me to present my grading scale and criteria, and we will get right into what is probably pound for pound the best horror movie series that has more than 2 sequels. Not exactly stiff competition, I will admit. These are what I consider the elements I cherish most about this series, starting with camera and editing, much more essential to this series than you might think. Yes, even films way outside of A24's wheelhouse are elevated by elements such as, good filmmaking. For the next category, we quite obviously have the deaths. This encompasses everything from the cleverness of the idea down to the effects that help with the execution. Next up is a category that I think some of you might find strange, and it's heart. This is an odd category to find in a series that includes people getting their insides sucked out by a pool drain, and I'm not saying these movies are intellectual or deep in how they do this, but I think with Bloodlines and even something like The Monkey that came out early this year, they prove how much the still beating heart is necessary for the blood to flow in this series. Why did I write that line? Good lord. Next up, we have a staple of the franchise, the seminal tragedy, or the premonition scene. A Final Destination movie's threshold for enjoyment is directly defined by the seminal tragedy. And I would generally say if you are not a fan of the movie by the end of the seminal tragedy, the movie and series might not be for you. Equally as important as the scares is the humor. Whether intentional or accidental, humor has been a part of this series, and it is at its best when embracing this dark comedy horror identity. And believe me, there are some laughs in this series that are totally accidental, but I consider essential to their enjoyment. And then lastly, we have the hook. What does this installment bring to the overall formula? Because these films consist of the exact same exposition scenes for like 30 to 40% of the runtime. New flavor, texture, or presentation is necessary. Now for the actual ranking themselves, and on top of giving them their own rating by the standards of the series, I will also be rating them by the standards of regular movies. I will also not be recounting the plot of each movie to you. Go check out Jordan Breeding's channel or something if that's what you're looking for, or you can just go watch the movies and come back. I can wait, I'm patient. But if you clicked on this video, I assume you're a fan, and if not, I hope I can provide a sort of watch guide as we dive into the best and worst this series is capable of. I'm going to start with the worst and best just to get the obvious stuff out of the way, because any fan of this series is well aware that Bloodlines firmly established itself as the best, and 4 will hopefully be the eternal low point. So let's start with the worst in the series, The Final Destination, aka Final Destination 4, aka the 3D one, aka the only one Tony Todd doesn't appear in, even by way of his voice. I have the camera work at an even 5 because it's held back almost solely by the insistence on filming in service of 3D effects. Filming this way makes it look like a made-for-TV movie, even in its best, most well-composed shot. And it also means that there's a lot of stuff that's filmed with the, it's coming right at the camera kind of effect, and it's just lame. Some of it's still well communicated though, so I don't feel the need to bring it lower than a 5. We constantly understand the choreography of what's going on, so in that way, serviceable. As for its deaths, I gave it a 6.5. Not only is there a lack of creativity and even less in the way of anxiety farming this series is known for, but the CGI is also just not quite there yet for most of these. There are 2 kills that kind of freak me out, so it's not all bad, but still nothing impressive. Also, probably this film's best quality. At heart, I gave it a 2. It would be a 0 if it didn't clear the very easy thematic hurdle of racism is bad, you know. As for the seminal tragedy itself, I've got it at a solid 4. Who has anxiety about this? I don't really know. I would be surprised if this was a waiting anxiety of most motorsport and NASCAR enthusiasts. It also doesn't do a lot to cause anxiety about this. Like, I don't think anyone watches this and then thinks, like, I hope a wrench or whatever doesn't land on the track and do that. Humor is also added too. I didn't laugh outside of the absurdity and wonkiness of some of the effects and kill scenes. And as for Hook, I'm giving it a 3 for 3D. Even old movies like Friday the 13th with its 3D installment have some kind of like time capsule to it. But if anything, this movie came around when the whole craze was dying out, so it's less of a time capsule and more of a harbinger. And as you can see by its Final Destination movie score and regular movie score, I don't really hold this in high regard.
Yes, I own you, machine.
Now let's move on to number 1, which is of course Bloodlines or Final Destination 6. And starting with its camera work at an 8.5, this entry finally uses the camera to beef up the comedy as well as the scale, scares, and spatter. Some of the tracking shots, specifically the CGI used to pull off the tracking shots, is a little too much, but if that's the trade-off for a movie that finally cares about the camera work outside of the death scenes, I will take it. And as for the deaths themselves, also an 8.5. You'd think the abundance of CGI might make some of these scenes floaty or immaterial. I will admit, some of them just look like bags of ketchup exploding, but other times it really does gross me out. The scale is thankfully never outside the grasp of what these effects can achieve, and that's kind of surprising actually. And as for Heart, it's a perfect 10, at least by the standards of this series. The Reaper is coming for a family this time. Even in premise alone, the heart is there from the start. Rhyme, unintentional. And it does earnestly go for sentimentality whenever it believably can. And as for the seminal tragedy, it's also ranked highly because it's as gruesome as it is hilarious. Acrophobia and Rube Goldberg logic abound, and the way the premonition plays into the story is cleverly done. I like it. Humor is also ranked highly at an 8 because it understands that well-timed, sparingly used jokes can help enhance the brutality of the horror, and boy is this movie brutal.
The trimmer could fall and hit the leaf blower guy, which causes him to blow stuff into the kid's eyes and then take the ball into his face.
A hook that operates in this sort of character-based way is kind of meta, and it's a fun addition to the series. I sort of hope that they keep it going forward. I would be totally okay with Grandma's Book of Death to be some new staple of the series this many movies in.
5-star review, yeah? Like and subscribe and all the things.
We've got Final Destination 5, and this one with camera work is sitting at a 6.5 because it's perfectly serviceable, but I also don't think it focuses on making this a new, innovative part of the series. Not that there aren't some good shots in this movie, it's just a lot of them feel overly planned and overly telegraphed, and none of them really enhance the deaths, which are sitting at a 7.5. Something this and 6 have in common are deaths that make you go, huh, can't believe that they haven't done that already. But unlike 6/Bloodlines, the CGI for a lot of these doesn't 100% feel there yet. And as for Heart, there's drastically more than in the previous movie, but not nearly enough to compete with the first 3 entries, if you ask me. It tries to at least make you care for the fact that these characters somewhat like one another and work well together, all that kind of stuff, but nothing really of substance. And as for the seminal tragedy, I've got at 8.7, which is the highest I could see anybody really rating this movie. Bridge collapses are just as big an anxiety as anything else in this series, so I think it's done very, very well. Unfortunately, humor is probably this movie's weakest quality. I've got it at a 4, and all I'm saying is I'm glad the hook for this film added some layers of moral ambiguity over it. And as for the hook, I've got at a really good 8. Taking life to gain more of it, a zesty addition for a 5th film in a series. Love the way they poke fun at it in Bloodlines.
That's it.
Ranked at number 4, I've got Final Destination 3. The camera work is a 10 here. I'm not saying that it's Oscar-worthy or anything like that, but I think it does exactly what a Final Destination film needs to do with its camera work. On top of framing all of the kills very well and creating a really foreboding atmosphere anytime that we're outside of that, the color grading in this movie is actually quite fantastic. It creates a very early 2000s nostalgia that also complements the, let's say, red colors. And much like Bloodlines, it also cares about framing and other things like that outside of the dangerous parts. Speaking of the dangerous parts, though, I've got the deaths at a 7. 3 of the most iconic sequences in the series are from this movie. And according to movie canon, as well as deleted scenes, tanning beds are apparently dangerous even with the buddy system. As for heart, I've also got it at a 7. These actually feel like classmates, each with varying amounts of reverence and care towards one another. They may all look like they're in their 20s, but I can live with it. It was the time it was made. I understand that.
I don't want to someday feel that way about you, Julie. And I can't talk to Mom and Dad. You're all I have left.
Seminal tragedy in this? Fantastic, and I'm not just saying that as a big roller coaster fan, because if I was, I would probably take issue with a lot of this stuff, because this roller coaster crash is sort of totally impossible. But even though I'm a massive fan of roller coasters, I am a bigger scaredy cat of heights and mechanical failures. So, wow. The constant speed, the suspense of getting on the ride, the brutality. Plus, if you don't know how roller coasters work, this probably seems 100% plausible to you. And also having Tony Todd's voice as the roller coaster devil, it's a great touch. It might be better without a certain camera-wielding character and the plot hole that he brings along with him, but, you know, all of these movies kind of have a asterisk that you gotta deal with. When it comes to humor, you get this feeling that one of the creators understood a bit better that they can get away with a lot of goofy stuff. A lot of the jokes feel very Spike TV, and I'm talking early 2000s Spike TV and how they're written. But the tone it helps craft makes this movie kind of a breeze to get through. Still, could do without 50% of the jokes in this movie, especially when a lot of the jokes go to the sex pest character. And as for the hook, I've got it a 7.5, and I do think both hooks are interesting here. Yes, I said both. Being able to predict how death will come by finding hints in photos taken with a 2000s digital camera, it has aged the movie in a very fun way. Much like the DVD game, the game basically uses deleted scenes to create a choose-your-own-death venture game out of the film. It won't blow your mind with a car engine fan or anything like that, but I'd be lying if I said this wasn't a very clever way to utilize unused footage. I do hate that the only person you can save is the aforementioned car engine pervert, but there's no getting away from that in this movie, unfortunately.
You may never return from Devil's Fight.
At number 3, we've got the first Final Destination, and I know that might be controversial to some, but hear me out. I think I make a good case, because I actually think the movie has aged in all of the best and worst ways you could ask for in a movie like this. Starting off with camera, it's an 8.5. There are shots in this that really make death feel like an invisible presence, that personify the Grim Reaper without ever really showing him. There are moments of suspense embodying everything Hitchcock stood for as a horror filmmaker. My only complaints come down to kind of nitpicks at the end of the day. Kind of things about how moments of respite are filmed and all that stuff, all eclipsed by things like this final shot, though.
I told you you were next! And it just skipped me. So who's next?
Is the final shot really cheesy? Yes, but that's exactly what some dishes need. As for the deaths being the first movie, a lot of these feel like they had something to prove, like they really needed to make sure that this concept had wings and could fly. I did not make that pun realizing that this first one involves an airplane, but I'm gonna leave it in as though I did. The concept of each death feels either very straightforward and efficient, or overly complex and very pointed. There's some really fun stuff in terms of choreography and concept here. At heart, surprisingly, I've got a 6.5. I do think there's some amazing vulnerability here that kind of feels like how a high school student would be reacting. It's all very silly, don't get me wrong, but I do like the heightened emotions of this at the end of the day.
My brother George, he told me to go and keep an eye on Alex. And so he stayed, and he told me to get off the plane.
And as for the OG seminal tragedy / premonition scene, I've got at an 8, because there's just something very terrifyingly prophetic about the anxiety-inducing premonition being a plane crash merely a year before 9/11. Plus the absolute ruthlessness of the film showing us just how far death is willing to go to well, follow through on its plans, yeah, this is definitely the kind of stuff that an entire franchise can build itself on. And as for humor, this one's also getting a 6.5. There's a lot of unintentional humor that's great, such as
Arrested. Tetanus. Nice one.
heart and humor are both very much here, and I appreciate the groundwork that they set, but there's still better stuff to come. And as for the hook, I had to give it a perfect 10. It felt disrespectful to give it anything other than that. The whole idea that death is constantly trying to stack up rows of complex dominoes to take you out is an elegantly genius one, so good that it propelled an entire franchise. The secondary hook of the seating order determining the death order of our characters and how it can be intervened with, it's all just a lot of fun. Also, everything Tony Todd adds to this movie and therefore the franchise is just the extra layer of character. This concept was done just well enough to open our eyes as moviegoers to it, and that's why it's getting a 10. It could have easily been bad.
Authorities are pessimistic about the possibility of finding anyone alive from the ill-fated flight. All 287 passengers are feared dead.
And up until Bloodlines, I would have said that Final Destination 2 is the best one, but since Bloodlines exists, Final Destination 2, ironically, is at number 2. As for camera work, it's an 8 out of 10 because this movie does a great job of showing abstract ideas and setups of where the Grim Reaper is going to strike next and how, which brings us to deaths. Perfect 10. Absolutely perfect 10. The budget definitely allowed this film to get away with more elaborate and, let's say, messy scenes. Some of them are less clever than the first movie, yes, but they make up for that in pure spectacle, terror, and abundance. Also, frankly, I love that our lead character from the first movie dies off screen by a stray brick. Not only does it drive home the fact that death will come back for you and never give up, it also lets my imagination run wild with the complicated series of events that led to that brick hitting him in the head. As for heart, I've got it a strong 7.5. This scene right here has more heart than the majority of horror films really do in their entire franchise, and that goes double by the standards of slasher movies, which Final Destination basically is. I think we all know that the seminal tragedy here is a perfect 10 as well. It did to log trucks what Jaws did for the water. This movie took the time to establish 2 identifiers for the series. It is a comedy of the darkest origins, and it detests snotty kids. Maybe just kids in general, actually. It still has that Spike TV problem, probably not as much as 3 does, but still. And as for the hook, 7 out of 10.
Man with hooks. I think I see a man with hooks.
Being able to make avant-garde, artistic interpretations of what the Grim Reaper is going to do next is a very fun addition for a sequel to make, especially for this series, because it just naturally elevates both the suspense and humor in tandem, because a lot of it is really silly. Also, creating new life to stop the cycle of death it's fun for a horror sequel to do. That feels like something that naturally fits into the lore.
You have to follow the signs, Kimberly.
How do you know my name?
I really do hope that this ranking above all conveys my appreciation for the individual elements of this series. I am, however, keenly aware that this ranking does bring into question, why do I like this series so much if almost none of the films break a 6 out of 10 rating? As my ranking system shows, it partially comes down to meeting these movies on their level. And much like a lot of stuff in the horror language of cinema, it requires knowing a little bit about how it got here. Before New Line Cinema were the Lord of the Rings people, they were decidedly the Freddy Krueger people, getting their start with TV movies, scratch and sniff cards, and re-releases of old films with lapsed copyright. This studio only shifted into what we know them as now, thanks to the overwhelming success of Nightmare on Elm Street, with the franchise netting almost $500 million across 30 years. While I enjoy the series for many reasons, I think the lasting success of it can be attributed to how easy it is to sell a moviegoer on the concept of the bad guy gets you when you fall asleep. It's an idea that makes you feel trapped, picturing how you would survive the events of the movie only to realize, at the very least, interacting with Freddy is not something you can outrun forever. This antagonist, and indeed the movies, would grow more grimly comedic as they went on, embracing a sort of horror-comedy hybrid, somewhat out of style but also out of a desire to become more palatable to a wider audience, which was a real, for better and for worse, situation. The concept carried the series across multiple sets of characters and scenarios, all using the strong central premise to try and create fresh variations on the original, almost always ending on a final scare that leaves the door open for a sequel. This cliché has become rightfully derided, partially because I don't think it was even good when they did it. Many people agree that the ending is one of, if not the worst part of the original movie. In other movies outside the franchise, it almost never does anything in service of the film's themes or atmosphere. While this formula of vengeful murderer, heightened scary silliness, and an easily understood premise was enough to get them to the Lord of the Rings money-printing finish line, the studio would kick off another horror series that used most of the structural elements Elm Street brought to the table, and then, I would argue, improved upon almost all of them, with its take on the last scare being one of the greatest contributions the series has. In other movies, it's a cliché meant to fill a genre expectation. In Final Destination, it's a reminder. It's a reinforcement of a central theme it's had since the start.
In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps.